So I'd like to begin. So I'd like to begin again with an offering and a refuge prayer. It's particularly appropriate today because the first topic of today, well, actually the major topic for the whole day is Buddhist refuge. So the first prayer is an offering prayer where we ask that beings who can help us stay in our lives and continue to teach us. And we do that by offering the thing that our teachers most want from us, and that is the work that we do, that they help us understand we need to do. So if you'd close your eyes for a minute and get in a meditative position, and bring to your mind the things that these words address. We offer the work we do here today to those from the past and those in the present who guide us toward an understanding of how this world really works and of our own true potential. By this deed, may every living being experience a pure world. We ask that these holy beings continue to offer us refuge from our suffering and ignorance through their spirit, words, and example. May it be so. This is Class 2 of Asian Classics Institute Course 16, which is a review course. Thank you, Craig. It's our second gathering, but it's actually in ACI 16. Class 3 and 4 we're going to cover today. And it relates to Class 2 in ACI catalog, if you will. So there are 18 courses in the Asian Classics Institute. The first one was what we covered last week in 2 classes, and that was about the 3 principal paths. And today we're going to do 2 classes on Buddhist refuge, which is covered in ACI Course 2. Remember, this is a review course of courses 1 through 5. So, since it's a review course, let's review. What are the 3 principal paths that we went over last week? The 3 principal paths that the Gelugpa tradition believe is the way to end suffering. What are the 3 principal paths? Anyone? Renunciation.
Bodhicitta.
Bodhicitta, which means what?
The wish to become enlightened for the sake of every living being.
Can you say
Total enlightenment.
Yes. Can you say that in other words? I mean, what does total enlightenment mean? It might not be meaningful to some people.
It's the wish to free oneself from all the mental afflictions that keep us coming back to this cyclic, suffering world.
And total enlightenment.
Total.
You use that term.
I did.
So enlightenment means what you said, but total enlightenment has a suffix to that.
I'm drawing a blank.
Well, you said bodhicitta.
Buddha mind.
How is it that your ending your suffering is going to be for the sake of all other living beings?
So that one becomes totally enlightened when they wish to free every being from the suffering of samsara.
And how is that possible?
By teaching them how to free themselves.
And where does one get the information about what to teach them?
From their teacher.
The wisdom of your teacher.
Not really.
No, from themselves.
And the wisdom within.
Yes, but the difference, the reason why bodhicitta is added in to this path is because it's what takes us one step beyond enlightenment or nirvana to get the tools that we need to help others, which include omniscience and the ability to emanate. So total enlightenment means, yes, you've ended all your sufferings and their causes, but also you've acquired these skills that do give you what you need to help all other beings reach enlightenment themselves. So it's kind of important to remember that, and that's what we're going to be addressing somewhat today, so that's why I'm pushing on that. So we have renunciation, bodhicitta, and
Perfection of wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness.
and that's what we're starting with today, actually, the definition of the perfection of wisdom. There were other ideas that we went over as part of last week, but those will be brought in some today. But in lieu of spending a lot of time also going over a review of ideas, I have a handout, of course, with a chart on it that goes over some of the ideas. So take a minute to look at this. And if anybody in Webland wants a copy of the handouts, they can email me for them. So I'm going to put my email address up here. So there were handouts last week, and there are 2 handouts this week. I think there were 3 handouts for course class 1 and 2 for class 2, or session 2, sorry, classes 3 and 4. So take a minute to look these over and see if you have any questions. Just for those who don't have the handouts, I will talk about the headers that are on the chart. The one is the vows of freedom. I don't know if we called them that last week, but those are the sort of Buddhist 10 commandments about how one comports their body, their speech, and their mind so as to not create negative karma. And that comes under the column of what to give up. So we're giving up things like killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, divisive talk, harsh words, useless talk, craving, ill will, and wrong views. And then across from it is a column which says what to take up. And under that it's titled Caring for Others, and it is the positive version of what I just said. So instead of killing, under Caring for Others, it says protecting life and honoring others' property and so on. It's just the flip side of the things that one shouldn't do. Then under what to give up, also the header of the 8 worldly thoughts, which we went over last week. And what to take up was information about karmic management. And we did speak a little bit about that last week, although we will be going over that in our last session, which will be on karma. So stay tuned for that. And if you would correct this sheet, karmic spelled, management spelled wrong. And under karmic management is the idea of purification. So we didn't go over that last week, but I had wanted to and didn't fit it in. I'll just take a minute to talk about that. The idea is that when we plant seeds, we reap what we sow, and we always reap what we sow. That was one of the laws of karma, that if we perform an action or have a thought that's negative, there must be negative repercussions from it, a balancing, so to speak, of what we put out into the cosmos, we will get back. However, according to the Buddhist tradition, you can ameliorate that. You keep that negative seed in your mind stream, but because of the goodness that you do to attempt not to do that again and to make up for it, that seed, they say, can be made impotent and it won't flower. So you always have your memories of things that you've said and done and thought, but the actual fruition of them can be stopped with these 4 forces, they're called, which is an act of purification. The first one is that you take refuge, particularly in the idea that things can change, that they have no inherent nature, that you regret whatever the negativity was that you participated in, meaning that you realize that it's going to cause negative repercussions. And you resolve to use the strength that you have to stop having those negative things come to you and doing negative things that bring them to you. And then lastly, you do something that makes up for it. I use the word recompense here. We've used other words for it in the past. Does anybody have another word for it?
Reconciliation.
Reconciliation.
Repay.
Or repay, yes. And we say that if, for instance, you were really negative to somebody in the grocery store and you've gone out and you realize that, you know, it was really your problem, not theirs, and you feel regret for that, but you can't sort of repay that person or make up for that person, that you do another act or say something nice to someone else with the thought in your mind that you are doing this to make up for that past action that was negative. And if you do all 4 of those things and you have that idea in your mind, then it maybe encases the bad seed from the past action and keeps it from coming back to you. Kind of wipe the slate clean, so to speak. So those are things to take up. We take up purification to make up for things that we should give up. And under what to give up, we're going to talk quite a bit about this today, and it's seeing things as self-existent, and included in that is yourself, your idea of who you are, your identity. Believing that this is something that's inherent, that's existed this way, will continue to exist this way. And so that's something we need to work on and give up as well. That things have any sense of inherent existence or permanence. And under what to take up, we've talked about some of these things in the past, and we'll continue to talk about them. So these are just some ideas about how to take up a Buddhist practice. And some of them include remembering the goodness that you have in your life. Instead of looking at the glass as half empty, you look at it as half full. So you give particular attention to the positive things that have happened, particularly the day before. And I personally think it's important to write them down so that you really make an impression on yourself, on your mind stream, that things are actually very good for you. And then with that in mind, you think about paying it forward perhaps. If some good things have come to you, then you want to share that opportunity, that goodness, by doing something for someone else. So recognizing the good things that have come to you, you make a plan for at least one good thing you're going to do as you go into your day. And hopefully you'll be spontaneous too and do other good things, especially without looking for any payback yourself, which we say produces merit, which is greater than good karma. Good karma, we say, produces a result in worldly ways, but merit is what propels us forward towards our total enlightenment. Another important thing to do is not just take a class once a week and then that's the end of it, but to continue to study on your own outside of class sessions So if you can, every day, do some sort of study or at least contemplation. And here are some things that you can contemplate. Your, as I said before, your leisure and fortune, that's a term that's been used to translate from the Tibetan. How much you have, particularly in this country and in this lifetime. Also think about the fact that it's not going to last forever, that your body that you're in this world around you will end at some time. It's definite. We don't know when, and when that happens, all the stuff we've accumulated is not going with us. So we want to focus on, this is death awareness, we want to focus on that in hopes that we use our time wisely, what little time we have, and not use it to get things that are really going to end up being meaningless when we're on our deathbed and we're reflecting on our whole life. We need to contemplate the idea of emptiness very much, and we'll be going over that today. Last week we went through a beautiful meditation called the 7-step cause and effect method for attaining bodhicitta, or colloquially we call it the mother meditation. And that's a beautiful meditation to do to take you out of yourself and bring you into awareness of all other beings in the world, as possibly having been your mother, since you have been in some part of you, we believe, some mind stream has been existing since beginningless time, and therefore we have had some interaction with all other beings over that infinite time span. Today we'll talk about couch potato contemplation and refuge as two other good things to contemplate on or meditate on as part of your daily practice. So that's something to take up. And perhaps this one section of the chart is empty, seeing things in self as self-existent. This is under the what to give up, and perhaps there'll be things you can think of that you can add in here about what things you could give up that will help you with this particular idea. Also, before we start the actual material from the course, I want to go over something that is sometimes confusing to people about Buddhism, and it will have an effect on some of the stuff we're studying today. And that is the idea that, particularly in this time, there are two considerably different schools of Buddhism. One is called Mahayana Buddhism, which means great vehicle, and that is the school of Buddhism that is practiced here in the center and is espoused in the coursework that we do. And this is the Buddhism that believes that the individual, the self, is not of an inherent nature and is constantly changing, and also believes that all phenomenon is the same way, and that we ourselves kind of are responsible for how we see things outside of ourselves, as well as how we see ourselves. So our perceptions are coming from us, particularly from our past experiences, our karma. And in the higher school of Mahayana Buddhism, it's called the highest school, we not only believe that we perceive things in our own, very own way, separately from others, but that we actually project them. So that's a little bit about Mahayana Buddhism. And this is typically practiced in Northern Asia, in places like China and Vietnam, Korea, Tibet, Japan, yep. And the other major school of Buddhism is called Theravadan Buddhism. Sometimes you'll see it in the literature called Hinayana, which means lower vehicle, and that term isn't used quite as much anymore because some people think it means a derogatory thing, because it stands for lesser vehicle. It isn't really derogatory, it just means the scope of their beliefs are smaller. than the Mahayana, because they do not necessarily believe that things outside of themselves are influenced by their own mind. So smaller in that regard, that they take responsibility for the fact that there is no inherent unchanging self, and that's their study to try to find that aspect. And those in Mahayana Buddhism believe that's true too, and so it's also part of Mahayana Buddhism. It's just that they take it a step further and believe that things outside of themselves are also of their own making and responsibility. And the Theravadan Buddhism is spread to southern Asia, so southern India and Thailand and Sri Lanka and other small sects are in probably in Malaysia and maybe even Indonesia, but small, not the majority of the population. So it's kind of important to think about these two perspectives because they do influence people's goals and some of how they practice. There's also a term called Vajrayana Buddhism, which is a part of the Mahayana group. And this was a later development in India, or at least it wasn't captured in any written way until later, after 300 AD probably. And this is stands for the Diamond Vehicle. And mostly these are considered esoteric teachings, the higher teachings that one has to gain entrance to, much like a graduate school, and I did mention that some last week. And this is about trying to get to this total enlightenment in this very lifetime. The techniques that can be employed, it's believed, to help reach this total enlightenment in this lifetime, whereas the other two aspects mentioned earlier don't necessarily have the belief that it's possible in a single lifetime, but will take many, maybe even eons. So just a little background for some of what we'll be talking about today. Theravadan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, and embedded under Mahayana, the more advanced study of Vajrayana Buddhism. So we are going over class 3 now of ACI 16, and this is about Buddhist refuge. So the ultimate Buddhist refuge is considered to be the perfection of wisdom that Craig mentioned earlier. And the term perfection of wisdom is used in several different ways in Buddhism. One of them refers to particular teachings that were purportedly spoken by the Buddha on emptiness, and they're called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. It's also considered to be the Spa Tantrika presentation of emptiness. Last week we went over 3 different schools of ancient thought in India. Does anybody remember what the first school was called?
The functionalist.
Yep, functional school. What was their major belief? What caused things to exist? Hint.
Causes and conditions.
So they believe that causes and conditions are the basis for reality, for things coming into our, what we think of as our real world. The next school that we talked about.
Independence.
Independent.
Independent.
Middle way, I'm going to put in MW, middle way, I'll go over that later. And that's the Spa Tantrika school that I just mentioned. So this idea of how things exist came a little later. The Theravadins beliefs are pretty much under the functionalist school here, believing in causes and conditions. The independent school added on to the idea that things come about because of causes and said that they come into existence for us based on what?
The parts.
So, parts. Things exist as collections of parts. So things are brought into existence through causes and conditions, and the way we perceive them is by labeling collections of parts. And then in the middle way school, there's another level called...
The implication or...
Consequence.
Consequence.
Or implication. And how do they believe things exist?
Projection.
Yeah, PFPK, by mental projection. In other words, everything is coming from how we see them, how our past experience causes us to see parts and collections.
Yep.
So each includes the earlier.
The mind-only school is part of the functionalist school?
That's what they said.
So, what do they mean by mind-only then?
I think I'd rather not
Okay.
address that because we have so much today,
So
but
much
we
to
can
cover, yeah.
talk about it at another time. It's also, you haven't done course 15 yet?
No.
Very well developed in course 15, so it's another place to look for the information. And actually, you have a searchable file of all of the courses, so you might want to do a little digging on your own on that. In our courses, we don't have extensive development of mind-only school. So, but if you might get more resolution by looking for it on your own and trying to make sense of it that way, but you may have to go outside to get a better sense of mind-only school, which is still practiced today, the mind-only school. And as I said, the Theravadins are considered part of the functionalist school too. And these two ideas of thought are certainly part of what we see today. And when I talked about where the two different kinds or any kind of Buddhism is practiced, I forgot to mention that it's practiced quite extensively in this country. It seems to be growing and growing more, and there are people who feel like this is where Buddhism will be saved, because lots of those other countries are now becoming much more secular and less involved in spiritual traditions. And we, on the other hand, have kind of crested in secularism, and now we're searching for other things. So it's possible that it's true we will be the holders of Buddhism in the future. So the perfection of wisdom, and it says, according to the Spa Tantrika independent presentation, they talk about the perfection of wisdom as well. And it's the wisdom that makes you perfect. So it's one of what we call the 6 perfections, which a bodhisattva, someone who has bodhicitta, which we just talked about, or tries to have bodhicitta, tries to use to make themselves perfect. And this isn't a course on that, but the highest of the perfections that we use all the other perfections to try to attain is wisdom. So another idea about the perfection of wisdom is that it's the highest level of someone who has perfected themselves. So the homework question 1 is called the definition of the perfection of wisdom, asks for the definition of the perfection of wisdom. And it has several components to it, this definition. One is that it is the knowledge of a person of the Mahayana tradition, of the greater way. With which they perceive emptiness. And we are going to be talking more about emptiness later on. But just quickly, it's the emptiness of things and persons as having any inherent self-nature. Changeable, all changeable. So the perfection of wisdom is the knowledge of a person of greater way, with which they perceive emptiness, and that is imbued with the wish for enlightenment. And one of the reasons that they say imbued is because, as we discussed last week, when you are actually having the direct perception of emptiness, you aren't having thoughts. You aren't wishing to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. But if you are able to have this direct perception of emptiness, which is a very, very challenging thing to happen, you get there more quickly, the scriptures say, by being totally motivated to do it for the sake of others, like we tried to bring up during the Mother meditation, that we need to repay all others for everything that they've done to help us in our life. And just without going through the whole Mother meditation, if you think about, for instance, what it took for this package of, or this Congo bar, gluten-free Congo bar, to get here, how many beings had to participate to make this thing come into my hand right now. And if you trace it back, you're going to get into probably the thousands at least, and some probably died for it. I think it's got coconut in it and other things, and insects and other beings may have died just for the production of this. Maybe the mice that were in the factory where this was produced had to be eradicated. I mean, it's amazing when you really think about the food that you eat, just the food, come because of so many beings. So anyway, that's a bit of a digression. But the idea is that the more we recognize how interdependent we are, the more motivated we should be to perfect ourselves, which would mean that we have had that experience, that very special experience called the direct perception of emptiness. And when we're in that, we need to have this bodhicitta as part of our being, even if we're not recognizing it at the time. So the idea here is they're really just describing the conditions to bring that on, to bring on the direct perception of emptiness. That would be the perfection of wisdom, or it would be the portal to the perfection of wisdom. So you have to have, it says, is the knowledge of a person with which they perceive emptiness. It does not say that you have to have the direct perception, but as a prelude to having it, you must have a very deep knowledge of what it means. And you must be imbued with bodhicitta. This is what we mean in Buddhism when we say there are two wings, the wings of wisdom and compassion. Or sometimes the compassion wing is called method. Both things have to be in us for us to have this very deep experience, and it has to happen in meditation, they say. So this particular definition doesn't give that condition of meditation, but at least anecdotally from our teachers we hear that it will only take place in meditation. So if we find ourselves feeling quite imbued with bodhicitta and truly grasping this idea of emptiness, we need to get into meditation and hope that the amazing opportunity arises for us. Homework 2. Again, typical of a course in Buddhism, and this is ACI Course 2, we look at where the ideas are coming from to see if the scripture is well vetted and is something we should try to test and get some belief in. So this case, the root text, is called The Ornament of Realizations. Last week I passed out the list of the great books of Buddhism on which all these courses are based. This is one of the great books, The Ornament of Realization. Abhisamaya Alamkara, the Sanskrit is. I'm not even attempting the Tibetan, since I haven't had that much experience with it. Abhisamaya Alamkara, Ornament of Realizations. It's a beautiful name. And they say that the author was Lord Maitreya, which is very interesting. Last week, the genesis of the work we had was supposedly Manjushri through Jason Kappa. Now we have Maitreya through Master Asanga. The idea is that the two M words, Maitreya and Manjushri, were actual disciples of the Buddha. These books are written forms of the teachings. So they came much later than Manjushri or Maitreya into the hands or minds of these other beings who may have been reincarnations of them, or who may have had some mental connection with them. And this book was written around 350 AD. Usually when it's they go to a mid-century like that, it's because they really don't know the exact time. So somewhere around 350 AD. And by the way, Master Asanga is also known for writing extensively on the Mind-Only School. So that may be another place to get good information about the Mind-Only School. The Ornament of Realizations. And one of the things that Geshe Michael spoke about here is people are, skeptical of this idea that somebody from another age could have imparted knowledge into somebody of a later age. This idea of Manjushri imparting information to Jason Kappa just may not seem possible to people, but those people who practice Buddhism, their end goal, especially in Mahayana Buddhism, is to become a Buddha, become what we call a deity also. And they say that for that to happen, one of the steps close to our being one is to see Buddhas around us. And so the idea that a Sangha or Jason Kappa in some way connected to these disciples of the Buddha is not so fantastical when you think about the goals that we have as Buddhists. But also he cautions us that non-Buddhists in particular may not find that this is something that they can take a belief in. So it's kind of an advanced idea that these works literally came from disciples of the Buddha of his time when he was on this earth. So, but we're also told that what Buddhas do, I think Craig mentioned that earlier, is that they teach. They find ways to teach us. So the idea that Manjushri and Maitreya take on a human form at a particular time in order to bring this wisdom to people isn't really so strange if you do believe in the idea of Buddhas, and not just Shakyamuni Buddha, but Jesus Buddha, and perhaps even people in our time who are amazing teachers of spirituality. even somebody like Jimmy Carter, who is, if you read any of his autobiography or you pay attention to what he's currently doing, he's a very, very inspiring being. Who knows, maybe even Bill Gates. I mean, when you think about all he and Melinda have been doing to try to help people in our world. So, homework question 3. Oh, they ask typical of all these courses, there's a root text, which is the ornament of realizations in this case, and then there's a commentary on that root text by a later, mostly a monk. And in this case, it was by Kedrup Tempa Tarje. And his dates are 1493 to 1568. And the name of the book is The Analysis of the Perfection of Wisdom. That makes sense. And he is very well known for a writer of textbooks at Saramay Monastery, one of the great monasteries in Tibet, the monastery that Geshe Michael studied with. So that's homework 3. For some reason I'm not finding homework 4, which is what does the analysis, there it is. Okay, I know why. I wanted to do homework 5 before I do homework 4, just because it seemed to make more sense. So homework 5 asks for a definition of refuge. So there are going to be 2 different definitions of refuge. One is the common definition of refuge, and one is Buddhist refuge. In this case, common definition of refuge. Does anybody remember it from having taken this course before with me? I think both of you took ACI 2 with me.
Is going for safety?
Yes. Well, it doesn't necessarily
Well,
say safety, but
For
help.
fear, to help, for
Yeah.
help, out of fear.
Yep, and with a belief that
Someone else will help me.
something outside of ourselves can help us, yeah. So it's based on fear and faith. Looking to some object outside of yourself in hopes that that object will be of assistance to you. So, they use the term object, meaning something that your mind perceives as an object. And, in this country, a lot of people go to refuge to money. Like, that's what's going to solve all their problems, right? Kind of interesting. So object is a very good word, I think. And as an example, they talk about if there's an intruder in your house, you are fearful. So who would you go to for refuge?
The police.
We'd probably go to the police, hopefully not a gun, as an object of refuge. And will the police always be able to help us if there's an intruder there? No, evidenced by the fact that some people have been, robbed or abused by intruders.
Go to Detroit and see when they arrive.
Yeah, before the police could get there. So Buddhists say something like the police cannot be the cause of having refuge, because it doesn't work in every case. The cause is something that will always provide the result that's desired or is expected. And we would say as Buddhists that the police can be a condition for safety or protection if you have the karma for it, if you have helped others in the past find such things, if you've been a refuge for others in the past.
So are you still talking, you're not talking about common refuge now, you're talking about...
I've just switched over and
Okay.
mentioned how the Buddhist refuge is different a bit.
Okay.
But the answer for the homework was just what we talked about, common refuge. But I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, about Buddhist refuge now. So in Buddhism, they say the ultimate refuge is the ultimate refuge is the three jewels. And they talk about the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewel. And I'm going to explain what they mean by those things. It's very interesting. Geshe Michael talked here about having been in Thailand and going to temples and seeing people bowing down and praying and looking like they're praying to statues and thangkas and asking for help. And he said, that's not Buddhist refuge. People do that for other reasons. It's not what it appears to be. Although there are some people who, because of what they've learned or been trained by their parents or their culture, might think that if you pray to a statue or representation of some being that they can be your safety, your protection. But he said there's a lot of proof that that can't be the cause. So if it were true that a God or a Buddha could protect us, then why wouldn't they have already protected us, for instance? So praying for that kind of protection to a being outside of ourselves hasn't worked in the past. So it can't be the cause of the real refuge that we're looking for. There's also, another proof of this in the Buddhist tradition is there was a story that the person that we think of as the Buddha, the classical Buddha, one of his names was Shakyamuni, which meant he was the quiet one of the Shakya clan. And they say after his enlightenment and his going around and teaching, he did go back to his family. He was in the Shakya territory, and you might remember he was a prince, and his father, had a kingdom. And but typically, of what happened in the whole world is that one prince tried to take over another prince's territory and things like that. So at some point, the Shakyas were under siege, and the Buddha was in that area at the time, and people came to his house and hid behind his robes, hoping they'd be protected from this invading group. And they weren't protected, and he could not help them. So even the Buddha, the actual person that we think of as the Buddha, could not be this refuge for people. And so one of the things that teaches us too is that the Buddha is said to be omniscient. Remember I mentioned that earlier, that's what we hope for when we go for total enlightenment. Omniscient about what people need, basically, because our whole job as a Buddha is to try to help others reach enlightenment. But not omnipotence, not the kind of power where they can wave a magic wand or use their might to protect people, but rather use teaching to guide, because they know the suffering that people are having and they know how to help them get out of it. And as I mentioned on the review sheet, what to give up and what to take up. But when you see people doing prostrations or just bowing their head or saying prayers or making hand gestures in front of perhaps statues or just without them, it's with the idea of putting before their mind stream the wish to perhaps become or have the qualities of those beings that are represented in the statues and the thangkas. So it's a wish for themselves to become like the deity, as I mentioned earlier. And perhaps for them to see deities around them to be awakened to the possibility that in fact there are beings around trying to teach us, help us, so that they awaken to the teachings. So it's a refuge in terms of changing their own mind stream that they are praying for. But we do have practices like Tonglen and other practices where we try to envision our energies going out to others, ourselves, and helping them, acting ourselves, practicing being a Buddha in a way, taking the goal as the path. We strive to become totally enlightened like a Buddha. And then the Buddha can be of help to others. So this idea perhaps of us sending out energy, again, may not necessarily cause changes in something outside of ourselves, but rather cause changes in how we see things outside of ourselves. So it's still a good practice, because we are putting in front of our mind a wish to see other people improve, and by seeing that over and over again, we change our perception, perhaps, of the other person that we're trying to help. So of the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, they say the Dharma jewel is the most important. And the Dharma jewel, perhaps is a question. Aha! Now we get to question 4.
What?
The definition of the Dharma jewel. Mm-hmm. And maybe that was more of a warm-up, so you better appreciate what is meant by the Dharma jewel. Here's the answer from the homework key. A truth or reality relating to the greater way, which is the Mahayana belief system in Buddhism, which involves either a cessation or a path. So our real refuge is cessation or participating in a path. And the path is truly experiencing the 4 noble truths, or the 4 Arya truths. And that happens when we get the true meaning of the 4 noble truths, or Arya truths, happens in the direct perception of emptiness. And the cessations that we need to end our negative karma production and to really have bodhicitta comes during the direct perception of emptiness. So the real refuge, the Dharma jewel, is our having the direct perception of emptiness, which we talked about a little bit last week. The direct perception of emptiness, they say, is not describable, because when you're having this about 20-minute experience, your mind is not engaged in thought, in elaboration. It's a direct perception. You're experiencing the sense that nothing has any definite inherent existence, which we will go over in more detail later. Some of the outcomes of this, after you come out of this direct perception of emptiness, we talked about this last week, but I'll go over a couple of them. You see the day of your enlightenment, when the actual cessations are complete and the path is complete. You see what it's going to look like. You see what the mind of a Buddha is like, the real Dharma jewel, the emptiness, the essence, the potential to be and do anything. You see how many more lives you're going to have before you're fully enlightened. They say once you've had the direct perception of emptiness, the maximum is 7 more lifetimes. Could be in this lifetime, especially if you practice the Vajrayana vehicle. You will also know that your perception of others will now be correct, and that all the perceptions that you've had before the direct perception of emptiness were not correct. You always had it wrong. And so, because of that, you're going to put all your effort into trying to help others. Because you'll see, they say for a while, a few hours, I forget how many hours now, you actually can read people's mind and see how they're messing themselves up, basically. So you see that, and your compassion just takes hold. And because you see that, you no longer create negative karma for yourself, because you see what it is that makes people unhappy, you yourself as well. One of my favorite things is that you will be born only in good situations after this experience, where you're surrounded by good teachers, people really guiding you, helping you. It's just that you have more work to do, and so you might have to take more lives, basically. But that'll be good lives, because they'll be propelled, because your good karma is overpowering your negative karma at this point. So you don't create any more negative karma, supposedly, but you've got negative karmas that you still have to deal with. You either have to live through the repercussions, or you have to be using those powers of purification. So that's what those lives are for, basically. And to learn additional things that you need, so that you can help others. So that's kind of just a summary of some of the things that happen, and this is in direct response to the Four Noble Truths, which I will go over again later on, but all of you have had discussion on those many times, so hopefully you have those in your mind. So there are 3 cessations, they say, that occur. One is the permanent end of doubt about the Buddhist path and scriptures. You know for a fact that it's all true, as long as you've had authentic scriptures. And you stop believing or perceiving or projecting that things have any inherent self-nature. These are permanent cessations. Well, that's kind of redundant, I guess. Cessation means permanent. And they also say you recognize that kind of aesthetic practices aren't going to help. Self-flagellation or deprivation of food, things like that. It's not the way to go. They don't help you in the long run. What will help you are some of the things that I mentioned earlier under daily practice types of things, particularly the idea of contemplation and meditation on emptiness and on compassion. So it said it was a cessation and a path, right? And a path of really, truly experiencing the Four Noble Truths. So they delineate this a little bit more. And this isn't part of the homework, but I think we should go over them. So the 5 paths. And I know you've heard about them before, so hopefully you'll be able to come up with them. These are the 5 paths that get us to total enlightenment. And embedded in this, of course, is going to be the direct perception of emptiness, but we get some ideas about how to prepare for it, which I've mentioned somewhat already. The first one is called, anyone?
Accumulation.
Accumulation. And that takes in two of the principal paths. Renunciation and bodhicitta, just what we talked about last week. Bodhicitta is spelled two different ways, by the way. Through renunciation and bodhicitta, you accumulate a lot of merit, which I already talked about. And you accumulate momentum, they say, too. So that's where the word accumulation comes from. I didn't understand that at first, but I really like that word now. Now that I understand it's about the merit that you accumulate through giving up negative things and taking up positive things, just like what I gave on the review sheet. Very clear about what you need to give up and what you need to take up. So for more details, email me for this sheet if you're watching Webland. So, three principal paths, right? Renunciation and bodhicitta are here, under accumulation. What's the other thing that's missing that's part of the three principal paths?
Wisdom.
So the next path is called preparation. And that encompasses deep intellectual study of emptiness. And that's how we gain our wisdom. Right? Study of how things really exist. And why? And why? I think the why is important. Okay, so these are the paths to get us to step 3, which is the path of seeing. So we have our 3 principal paths embedded in our 5 paths. This is kind of new to see it written like this for you. Did you understand it this way, the 3 principal paths embedded in these first 2 of the 5?
I don't remember it being taught to me that way, but yeah, makes sense.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really helps me. Seeing is what we mean by the direct perception of emptiness, that 20-minute experience. Just using the shorthand for it. So it's only a 20-minute experience. In that time, have you gotten over all the many, many lifetimes of habituation and negativity? Do you suppose?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
No.
But you're well on your way because of what I said before. You're not going to do negative things anymore because you see what it does to people and to yourself. But you've got to learn the new ways. And so you have to do what?
Meditate.
Habituate.
Habituate. The truth about the 4 Arya truths. Using the DP, the experience, to recondition your life. I like that expression.
Would that also be meditation?
Sure. And we have a little story coming up about the magician, which kind of illustrates the deal here. when you come out of the direct perception of emptiness, you come back into what we call this deceptive world or this apparent world or whatever. We used 3 or 4 different terms for it last week. And you live in it again. And you see these things as self-existent. You know, it's not over by a long shot. You see them as self-existent because of the habituation of seeing them as self-existent. But you know in your mind and heart that they're not self-existent. But you're going to have to bring these things together. A Buddha sees things both in the deceptive way and the ultimate way. And that's what you're habituating, seeing things the way Buddha would. So you're saying, you're trying to learn that these things are not inherently coming at you, but coming from you. And when you've done this reconditioning of your life, you've habituated the truth of this. It's the end of the path, and they give it a funny label. What is it?
No more learning.
No more learning.
That means you can put your feet up?
Not at all. Did you remember what a Buddha
I
does?
think so. No.
Would that make you happy?
No. No.
We're going to be talking about nirvana, 2 different kinds of nirvana. And the point is, some people, that's their goal. Put my feet up, be at peace.
That would be the Theravadas.
That's basically, the Theravadas, because they're only focusing on understanding their role, who they are, not necessarily seeing that they have any kind of connection with things outside themselves. So they want to get peace from suffering, as everybody does. So I wouldn't say they necessarily want to put their feet up, but
No.
but it's the concept of that, maybe. All right. So we have paths within paths, stories within stories.
Numbers within numbers.
Sometimes the way we take in the information, or perhaps the way it's even taught, it seems all disparate. It seems like here's a group of information, here's another group of information. We're not seeing how it actually does all weave together. So I think this is a very helpful way to look at it. And underlying this all in the DPE, which I don't have time to go through here, but is in other courses, is how all of this takes the structure of the 4 Arya truths. Life, I will go over it just briefly. Life is suffering. There are causes for it. Because things are caused, that means they can be changed. The effects can be changed by changing the causes. And there is a path for doing it, right? And that's what comes up in great clarity when you have the direct perception of emptiness. The truth of all that, remember, no more. The cessation of doubt about that. And then under each of those, there are other things experiences that one has. So it's latent in your mind, it's ever present in your mind, the truth of those 4 things. And so you work towards changing things by taking on these paths, or these paths at this point. All right, so I have another handout for you that perhaps helps some with this idea. Where is it? Yes. Here it is. Because we are, and we'll be going over more of this later. But it talks a little bit about nirvana, because we're at no more learning. And that would be nirvana. And as I tried to engage with Craig about, is that the Mahayana practitioners are going for what we call a higher nirvana, Buddhahood, the end of suffering for all, whereas the Theravada practitioners are just trying to end the personal suffering. And you see that highlighted under goal on the chart I just gave you. And some of the other things on the chart we'll be going over in the next class. So I'll come back to this chart later, but I just thought that kind of highlighted the difference. And actually, I'll just go over a couple more terms because they don't actually come up in the next classes, but they've been used in other classes. So there's the term of listener and self-made Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And both the listener and the self-made Buddhas are part of more of a the Theravadan practice, whereas in the Mahayana practice, the practitioner is trying to become a bodhisattva, which is to have the tools to be able to help all beings reach enlightenment. And they say that the term listener kind of bespeaks that the person hears all the teachings, including this is pretty much from Mahayana perspective, hears the Mahayana teachings, but doesn't put them into practice. You know, is still working on the no self concept, but doesn't put in the practice of embracing the need to help all beings. So they hear it, but they don't necessarily, it doesn't meet with where they are in their learning cycle. They can't, you know, it's too much for them to deal with at this point, perhaps. And, you know, truthfully, I think some of us who have been brought up in the Mahayana tradition can find more comfort going back and just trying to worry about this, you know, self. And actually what I read to you last week talked a little bit about that you really do have to start there. You have to figure out the fact that you are an ever-changing person before you can even get into the deal of helping others. So we're all basically listeners until we have bodhicitta. And then this idea of self-made Buddhas is a term I'm not sure that holds today. They say that occurs when there aren't Buddhas in the world, and that they're able to kind of get this on their own without teachers. But they say that's because they've had so many lifetimes of teachings, they're just here finishing it off, doing the work they need to do, maybe that they didn't quite do on their own, but they've had plenty of instruction. Something like that. So when they say they come into a time when there aren't any Buddhas, what that means is there aren't any Buddhas for them. If we're, you know, if we say it's a perception or a projection. There may be Buddhas for other people apparent, but not apparent to them. So, you know, it's all kind of your own blinders in some ways that keep you from getting to the greater vehicle, according to some of what the scriptures say. And there are people who wouldn't buy that whole description, but it's kind of from the Mahayana.
It's written differently, I believe, in the Abhidharma. They talk about periods of 80,000 years. And
right. But
it's ups and downs of the number of Buddhas that are available.
Right. But that is very much more of the Pali early teachings, Theravadan practice kind of thing. But that does go with the self-made Buddha too, the Abhidharma. Okay, so we just finished the 5 paths, and now we're going to talk about, we didn't really finish up with the Buddha jewel or the Sangha jewel, so we're going to address that, and then we're going to take a break. The Buddha jewel is refuge in the fact that we will eventually awaken to our true nature, being a child of God, if you will, if you want to bring in the Christian scripture, or being a Buddha, or Buddha nature. Recognizing that we lack any inherent nature, that we have the potential to see everything in all times. That's what a Buddha does. and to be able to see both the apparent world and its ultimate nature at the same time. So the lack of inherent nature is what we mean by emptiness. So again, emptiness comes into play here under the Buddha jewel. Awakening, the refuge is in the knowledge that our mind stream is available to be whatever we want it to be. It's empty of restriction. But we can only reach any of this understanding, the Dharma jewel and the Buddha jewel, if we eliminate the things that are obscuring awareness of our true nature. We talk about those as our mental afflictions, or as the Yoga Sutra talks about them, the turnings of the mind, yogish chitta vritti nirodha. And then there's the Sangha jewel, which is defined as anyone who has had the direct perception of emptiness. So the collection of beings who have had this opportunity to experience the truth of the Four Noble Truths. And you don't need robes, you don't have to become a monk to experience it. But it does require great effort and training with a teacher and meditation. So again, we've got this idea of perception of emptiness as part of the Sangha jewel. That there are beings around us who have had this experience who can help us. And then they bring up a couple of other ideas of refuge. Causal refuge. Some causes for us to get to refuge, to get to emptiness. Some things that will help us to do that. Particularly, I think, as we think about the Sangha jewel, being in a community of like-minded people, which we also in this day and age refer to as Sangha, means that we are surrounding ourselves with potential Sangha members, potential people who will see the direct perception of emptiness perhaps before us, or maybe who have, but we're not aware that they have. So it's the causal part is, instead of being with people who perhaps don't have any ideas about Buddhism, a good idea to surround yourself with people who are doing some of the investigation that you are. That's one way we can think about causal refuge in the Sangha. And causal refuge around the idea of the Dharma jewel is going to be studying emptiness, right? Getting the most information we can about how things really exist. And through logic often. We need to, do the 3 tests that the Buddha talked about: direct perception, logic, study of scripture. So you kind of have to turn it on its head to get to direct perception, which means study scripture, so then you can use your logic to believe in what the scripture says, so that ultimately you will have the direct perception. So that's sort of some causal refuge taking. And the resultant refuge is the belief that you will reach Buddhahood. Without that belief, how are you going to engage in a serious way that's going to allow that to happen more quickly than eons ahead? So the common theme of the three jewels is emptiness, which is the true protection. And going for refuge then means that you start to really work to believe in the fact that you yourself supply reality. That your world and your identity is the product of your karma, your past experiences, including subtle memories of those past experiences that you are not cognizant of, but have an effect on you. And we all know these things exist. Things that we do habitually, that we don't even think about. They're just, we've wired ourselves to be in a certain way. And so we've got to recondition ourselves to think more like a Buddha rather than a so-so-kewo, which means a child who doesn't have the knowledge. But on a daily basis, how does it help you to understand some of this? When someone appears to be angry with you, the best way to deal with it is to have wisdom about why it's happening. I mean, we talked, I think, last time about, well, you can walk away so you don't get all heated and yell back. Or you just take it and be like a bump on a log. But the best thing to do with anything is to try to take a lesson from it, to learn from it. And so you think about, you learn, why is this happening? And you could try to come up with a mundane cause. You know, this person's having a bad day, they get angry at everybody, they've got loads and loads of excuses. But we're not going to be able to change things if we think like that very much. But if we realize that the angry person is coming at us because we created the karma for it by being angry with somebody else in the past, then we have a chance to change things in our future, right? By not responding in an angry way, but having compassion for this person. Because you know what that person is feeling. They've lost control of their emotions, and they're not going to be happy about it later. It's going to make them feel bad and get in their way later on. So have compassion. And use it as an opportunity to reflect on, do you still have that potential yourself to get angry? If when that person got angry at you, for one split second, you got angry, you had an angry feeling or a rationalization or something outside of yourself, you still have potential for anger. So this, we say, this angry person is a wish-giving jewel because it gave you a chance to self-evaluate about your own potential to have an angry response. So thank that person. And don't get angry back so that that person stops being angry with you in the future. Okay, let's take a break. This one didn't record. It would be this one, the old center one.
Okay.
Could be out of memory, who knows? Oh, please. Freezing. Did we turn the heat up?
I didn't bother. I knew I came in. I didn't think of it.
Well, you wonder cold.
This is also,
Where did you come from?